Can you hear me?
Evening. Please take your seats. This meeting of the Palo Alto Unified School District Board of Education is called to order. The board met in closed session this afternoon and took no reportable action. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda order. I've consulted with the superintendent, and I propose that we adopt the order with the exception of moving items A and H through K to our next regular board meeting.
I move that we adopt the agenda with A and H through K, move to the next board meeting.
Second.
Student preferential vote.
Aye.
Board members, we were recently informed that when we have a board member participating by teleconference, as we do this evening, that the Brown Act requires that we take all of our votes by roll call. So first I want to apologize for not knowing that and not having done that on those couple of occasions in the past when we have had a closed session, members teleconferenced in. But that's why I'm going to do that this evening. So that's why you'll notice the change in procedure. So this is a roll call vote on the adoption of the agenda order as proposed by Ms. Godfrey. Mr. Brienza?
Sorry, I just had to unmute. Yes.
Ms. Godfrey?
Aye.
Mr. Collins? Yes. Ms. Baton-Caswell?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well, so that passes by a vote of 5-0. The agenda order is adopted with those changes. The superintendent's report is next. Now this is where I do something entertaining.
Please stick to the student board members.
Let's move to the student board members. Mr. Arun.
All right, so in the last month, so a lot of things that happened since the last board meeting. So first, Jackson Katz is a speaker who came on the behest of the RISE task force. He came on April 11th. And I think a lot of gun students thought that he had a really good presentation. He built a lot on our previous speaker, Anea Bogue's ideas. Still, I think students felt that he circled around too much and his speech lacked structure, so it went on longer than it might have and left little time for questions. And some students I know didn't feel like he talked enough about how we can actually create a better culture of student support student and a better culture of preventing people from making derogatory comments on campus. Still, I think it was a really positive talk, and I'm glad that we're having these conversations at school. On April 14th, Gun had its prom at the Metreon in San Francisco. It was an awesome night, except for the fact that we had some bus problems, as SCC members in the audience would know. One bus broke down even, but we're all working on fixing that and reimbursing students for that specific bus. But all in all, I think we had an amazing night. Prom was fantastic. That same weekend, 20 students from Gun Theater and 20 students from Pali Theater all went up to Ashland, Oregon for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And they watched 5 plays, including Othello and Henry V, and they attended a lot of actor workshops and cool breakfasts. So Gun Theater had a really fun time up there over the weekend. Definitely a good trade-off for prom because I know they loved it. All of last week, we celebrated International Week at Gun, and every single day at lunch, we had performances from line dancing to taiko to bhangra to even a hip-hop performance. And on Thursday last week, the Gun PTSA had their giant international potluck for all students. Tickets were $5, and the food was really good from what I hear. I was not there because last Thursday, the U.S. Foreign Policy Honors class at Gun took a field trip to Stanford to actually attend a guest lecture about invited interventionism in other countries. I thought it was a pretty cool discussion, and I think the foreign policy class got a lot out of it. This week we have our annual dodgeball tournament, bookended by our little performing arts week celebration called Enside Lands. I know Pally had Quadcella earlier in the year, but Enside Lands, you got competition now, and it's good competition. Yesterday at lunch and Friday at lunch and after school, we have a ton of performances, also including our spring fling celebrations and a block party and ice cream and a whole bunch of other fun activities. Combined with Friday night, the Thespian Club is hosting an open mic at 6:30, so slide over because it's free, and there's a lot of performers, including myself. I got signed up to play in a band, so we'll see how that goes. And then next week, from Wednesday, May 2nd to Saturday, May 5th, Gun Theater is putting on its annual student-directed one-acts. So go to get your tickets at Gun Theater, theater with an RE.org. To buy your tickets for one acts. I think they're $10 for non-students and $5 for students. And you'll see 6 super creative, really amazing shows directed by gun students. I'm directing one of them myself, so you guys should all come see it. And shows are at 7 p.m. all nights except for a 2 p.m. Saturday matinee. And then at the next meeting, May 8th, I think gun is going to be in the swing of its AP season. So all our students are going to be swamped with, all our upperclassmen are going to be swamped with AP tests. I think one unintended consequence that I think is, unavoidable is test stacking. I know next week a lot of my classmates have tests upon tests upon tests to finish the semester before we get into APs. It's not anyone's fault, but I think the stress on campus is certainly you can feel it. But aside from that, we're having a lot of celebration on campus, and Gun's having an awesome spring. So that's all for today.
Thank you. Mr. Islas.
Good evening. Well, happy to be back. I was out because of a concussion. Sorry for my absence. Well, not much is going on. Prom was 2 weeks ago. There was approximately 820 students at City Hall in San Francisco. Record number of scholarships that ASB gave out, 71. There was 88 guests. Teacher appreciation is going on right now at Pally, where there's teachers' faces posted on posters and they're telling their stories. And it's really wonderful to see that teachers are actually human, just like students. Appointed applications were due today. I am not quite sure how many applications we got today. I'll be bringing that to the next board meeting. And we also had the exact same assembly as Gun. And just adding on to what Arun said, the speaker had great points, and a lot of students I talked to said he was rambling on, and the speech could have been condensed to 1 hour. It was in the gym and thinking about how many students we could fit in the gym, how many students were there, how many teenagers actually were playing with their buddies, and how maybe we could bring it back to a class, talk about it in our classes, is what I got a lot out of a lot of students. Changing our school week is this week. It's going on from April 23 to 27th. There's lunch out on the quad. There's food and club and performance out on the quad. Musical performances. Yesterday was service day. Today was lunch out on the quad. Wednesday is self-identity. And Thursday is sources of strength. And what are your sources? And Friday will be a little bit of everything. Link Crew is closing soon. On May 16th, applications are due. It's on a Wednesday. And if you see these blue papers, that will give you the link on campus. Thank you.
Thank you. We're sorry to hear about your concussion and hope that you take it easy. Superintendent's report.
Thank you for your flexibility on that, although I hate to follow both of these gentlemen because they're hard to follow, so articulate. So, but the change in schedule produced a little bit of a change in notification for people. So thank you for the flexibility. So a lot going on here at the district. Just wanted to say I've been at the PTA board executive meeting, working with our PTA folks, an amazing group of people doing great things for our students and our schools. I'm just greatly appreciative. LCAP planning meeting, we're really working on that LCAP and bringing that forward to you in just a couple months. The work being done on that I think is going to be really meaningful in terms of strategic district efforts. Been at Fairmeadow and Pally working on needs assessments related to hiring processes for incoming principals. Been out talking with staff at Juana Briones as they'll be welcoming a new principal as well. We had our district city meeting about the Churchill Bike Path extension, discussion on that. We also hosted a Title IX boot camp here. It was an investigator training that was a collaboration with Project 9 and PAUSD as the sponsors. We had a packed room. I want to say there were maybe 40 plus participants in this, some from within the district, many from without. So an opportunity, is that my signal? So an opportunity for us to really work on collaboration and shared practice with our partners in other districts. I did have a chance to join the fun at the Pally Prom, and that was just a wonderful event. Got to ride the bus with Carolyn Benfield, and the students supervised us quite well. I think we did a good job on the bus. But what I do want to say is that the folks up at the City Hall in San Francisco gave a huge shout out to Matt Hall for the organization of the event. And they said it was unlike anything that they had seen. And they also said, we want you to know that students from Palo Alto High School are really amongst the best groups of kids that we have had up here. They thought the behavior was just impeccable. Kids were polite, respectful, appreciative. And so the folks that were supervising there, including law enforcement at the City Hall, really called out our students in terms of their positive behavior. Said, when you guys want to come back, let us know because we'll put you at the top of the list. So thank you for that. Last Friday night was really exciting. We had the PAEA Excellence in Education Awards Night Dinner. This was the first annual event, and I want to give PAEA President Terry Baldwin a huge note of appreciation. If we can thank Terry for this. For the amount of thoughtfulness and work that goes into setting up an event where we truly have an opportunity to celebrate the best of education, certificated staff, classified staff, leadership, substitute teachers, volunteers, the community that comes around our students in our schools to make sure that the student experience here is really so excellent. And Terry, just the sense of surfacing the joy and the and recognition for the efforts that are being made here on a daily basis. So thank you for that. It was quite a lovely evening. Tomorrow night we'll be going to the Santa Cruz County School Board Association Hoffman Awards dinner. Looking forward to that, and Melissa might comment more on that later. Trustee Batten Caswell, I'm sorry. And Thursday evening we do have the Palo Alto PTA Council Honorary Service Awards. So lots of exciting events happening and going on. That concludes my report for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the consent calendar. These are items that are approved all at once with no discussion unless a member of the board or a member of the community wishes to comment on one of them, in which case we will pull it from the consent agenda and take it up at the end of our regular agenda.
So I have one very small edit on D.
Okay, so we'll pull that.
Okay. So I move that we approve the consent calendar absent D.
Is there a second? Second. Student board member preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Ms. DeBrienza?
Aye.
Ms. Godfrey?
Aye.
Mr. Collins?
Aye.
Ms. Baton-Caswell?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. The consent calendar is approved with the exception of item D, which we'll take up at the end of our regular agenda. And now is the next on our agenda is open forum. This is an opportunity for members of the community to address the board on a topic that does not appear on the board's agenda for this evening. So if you would like to do that, you can fill out a card over there on that table, and you'll be called to the podium to address the board. And if you'd like to address the board on any agendized topic, you can use the same procedure. Just note on the card which item you want to address. I'll call community members 3 at a time so that you can get yourself ready to speak. First is Ken Horowitz, then Kathy Jordan, and then Deanna Shute. Okay.
Thank you. Ken Horowitz, I live on Homer. As you know, I've been here a few times, and just going to give you an update what's going on with the sugary beverage tax. I'm currently working with a couple of council members, and I'm hopeful that in the next month, we'll have something on the agenda, and I would certainly like the school board to be involved. I do have a copy of all our council members and their emails. If you'd like to write them, let them know that you support this sugary tax. The Palo Alto Weekly did a story on Wednesday, and of course, once it goes online like that, lots and lots of comments come back. And I've learned a lot just listening to the comments, and I'm more energized because I realize a lot of people don't really understand what's going on with sugary beverages. And education is the key, certainly. And I had a meeting earlier with Interim Superintendent Hendricks, and I'd like to, if this tax does pass, I'd like to see some improvements in our living skills class, that we really focus in on nutrition. And a lot of comments were, what should government's role be in this? Well, the government is very involved in the corn subsidies, and they're putting a lot of high fructose corn syrup in our sodas. And so to say the government is not involved and that we shouldn't be involved is ludicrous. I was over at Berkeley. I've seen what they're doing with the Berkeley Unified School District. I mentioned last time, in 2 years, they've raised $3.8 million. They've given $1.5 million to the Berkeley Unified School District. And one of the programs that really work well over there in Berkeley is cooking classes. I don't know if we have kitchens in our schools. Maybe we do, I wasn't sure. But they are doing that. They're improving the cooking classes there. And I don't know if you saw in the paper, and I sent you an email, in Oakland, who also passed the sugar tax, they are making sure that now all there are water stations at every school, filling stations, water filling stations, because they're very concerned about the lead in some of the water pipes that these facilities have been going on for years. So there's a lot of good stuff that can come out of this soda tax. I hope you can support it. It's a win-win for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy Jordan, Deanna Shute, and Carolyn Benfield.
Thank you. I'd like to bring up an item that is not on the agenda, but I feel should be. The investigative report on the November 2015 alleged sexual assault incident at Pali. This report was supposed to be finished by Cozen O'Connor in March 2018, hopefully to report on what occurred and to report on the district's response to that incident. Our school board members and also Palo Alto Unified say it is focused on compliance. One of the charges of the RISE task force is to give assurance of compliance. We have quotes from 2 school board members in the Daily Post. Mr. Dauber saying he has a focus on the district's compliance with federal laws around sexual harassment complaints. Ms. Godfrey saying she planned to devote her remaining time on the board, one of those things, to a focus on improving the district's culture and response to harassment complaints. And yet not either one or any other board member nor Palo Alto Unified has publicly committed to release that report on the alleged sexual assault incident, which we taxpayers will be paying for, just as we paid the $846,000 for the Cozen report on the October 2016 incident. I noted $72,000 Cozen expenses for March 2018, for example. Now Pali is considering applicants for the principal position. And the question in my mind is, how can Palo Alto Unified be considering applicants for the principal position who may be implicated for not honoring our students' civil rights and potentially did not provide them with equal access to their education? That is what the November 2015 family said. If the administrators did nothing wrong, not releasing the report does them a disservice. If there was wrongdoing, the parents and taxpayers and students deserve to know. And while I brought up an item that should be on the agenda, in my view, I wanted to touch on an item that should not be on the agenda, or shouldn't have been, in my view. Once again, the school board members in the Palo Alto Unified says it's focused on compliance. as it should, given the 4-year OCR investigation, the previous one, a Terman, Cozen report, Jordan Middle School knife brandishing, RISE task force, assurance of compliance. Yet we had an agenda item, now postponed, which addresses complaints concerning district employees, which will reduce oversight and accountability for district employees, AR 1312.1. This proposed policy is not even fully fleshed out, yet it has leapfrogged over many other policies ahead of it in line, and it proposes to reduce accountability and oversight for our district employees. And I ask if we see a connection between the two, the non-release of November 2015 report, policy change for AR 1312.1. In my opinion, first Palo Alto Unified hides the ball, and now it hopes to take the ball away altogether. Thank you.
Thank you. Deanna Shute, Carolyn Benfield, and then there are 3 speakers who I think are going to be speaking in order, so I'll ask you to come up after these 2.
Mr. Dauber, do you mind if I comment on that ding-dong noise? That noise is, Ms. DiBrienza is offsite and calling in, and that's her getting dropped off and dialing back in, so don't feel like you need to stop talking for that ding-dong noise.
Thanks.
Thanks, sorry about that.
Super. Hello, my name is Deanna Shute, and I have been a teacher at Pali for 18 years. Most days, I think I'm a pretty good teacher, and the reason that I think I'm pretty good most days is because my teachers trust me. They know that I care and that I want the best for them and that my classroom is a safe place to learn. It's so simple, and most teachers instinctively know this. When teachers trust you, that's when the magic happens. When there's no trust, nothing good happens. And if my classroom was an environment of distrust, that would be on me. As the teacher, it is my responsibility to own the environment that I have created. Today, I hold you to the same standard. I'm so disappointed that this well-educated community has not learned this important lesson. Sadly, you only have to look at the Palo Alto news forums to see what we have become. Our district is riddled with distrust on all levels with all constituencies. It's everywhere. Distrust is in meeting rooms, in hallways, it's online, it's in coffee shops, school sites, and it's in this very room. Distrust is destroying this community, and we cannot afford to pretend it's not happening because our students are watching us. We've normalized distrust to the point where everyone is numb to the damage it's doing. It's on you to own that, to think long and hard and make necessary changes. Nothing systemic changes without your courageous leadership. I say this with hope that today will mark a new day, a day when we stop and acknowledge the distrust in our community and vow to strive for something better, a day when we stop disparaging others and resolve to be kind, a day when our failures are not marked by fear of resignations and lawsuits, but rather opportunities for very good people to unite and work together towards improvement. A day when we say loud and clear that antiquated systems are not burdening us, antiquated systems are burdening us, not incompetent people. Just as I must own the classroom environment that I create, so must you own the culture of distrust that's crippling the schools and our school community. Creating a positive and supportive school culture starts and ends with you, the school board. All of the lesson planning, formative assessing, and curricular aligning that teachers do every day amounts to nothing if students don't trust their teachers. Likewise, all of the school initiatives, accountability protocols, and budget oversight that you do every day will also amount to nothing without trust. Again, I'm responsible for the culture in my classroom. I hold you responsible for the culture you've created at PAUSD.
Thank you. Carolyn Benfield, and then Kim Shimazaki, Rika Yamamoto, and Satomi Okazaki.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Benfield. I've worked at Pali for 20 years as the principal secretary. I'm on the Ed Council and the Site Council and various committees. I think I should talk about love, because I think we need some more of that in this room today. I'm here because I love Pali. And I'm also here because I keep hearing that coming to these meetings and speaking to you is how to make you understand or respond to us. So we know that didn't work so well for us in the fall when we all came to talk about Kim, but I persist, still I persist, right? We are sitting next door to one of the finest high schools in the country. And that doesn't happen without great staff, great leaders, teachers, classified staff, yay, classified staff, and of course, great students. It's us working together with the students always is our true north that makes us a great school. I would love to see the district administration and the school board defend our great teachers and leaders publicly when they are attacked publicly. That would be a dream. What would be amazing would be if there was maybe an op-ed written that about how proud you are to be here and be part of this community. That would really be something. And wouldn't it be great if that love and kindness and compassion were the norm here in Palo Alto? Thank you.
Thank you. So Kim Shimazaki, Rika Yamamoto, and Satomi Okazaki, I understand you're doing 3 pieces of a statement, right? So I won't call your names, and and each of you will take up to 3 minutes. Okay.
At the March 27th meeting of the PAUSD School Board, new school names were chosen to replace Terman Middle School and Jordan Middle School. The most contentious issue that came before the board at this meeting and in the weeks preceding it was whether a middle school should be named after an American man, Fred Yamamoto. In the weeks leading up to this March board meeting and during the board meeting itself, some ugly sentiments of prejudice were exhibited. Merriam-Webster defines prejudice as an irrational attitude of hostility directed against an individual, a group, a race, or their supposed characteristics. During the board meeting itself on March 27th, Ms. Rika Yamamoto, a parent of 3 children in our school district, spoke. She explained to our board and those in attendance how it felt to carry a name that has excited controversy in this community, even though in the past she never encountered any negative reaction to her name in the United States or South Korea. She shared with the board that this controversy and situation has made her and her husband worried about their children's safety. She expressed a desire to be supported by our school district and the entire community. These feelings of Ms. Yamamoto's fear are amply justified, given the heightened emotions exhibited around the issue and at the board meeting itself. People opposing the name Fred Yamamoto spoke about how the name Yamamoto triggers painful feelings and memories, horrifying memories and pain, Hitler and bin Laden, horror, etc. Shockingly, multiple people witnessed that many snickered in response to Ms. Yamamoto's concerns. This response shows a complete lack of empathy and understanding of the contentious environment created for some families in the Palo Alto community that we all share. There have been online comments like, "No single ethnic name is a symbol of diversity," and Yamamoto is nothing short of horrifying, and people will feel more offended than inspired by the name Yamamoto. There are other families in our school system with the last name Yamamoto. Surely these families must be experiencing fear for their own children and a level of vitriol aimed at their name. We are sympathetic to the experiences of everyone in our community and do not diminish anyone's pain, but even when feeling pain, we must not act on views grounded in prejudice.
The decision by board not to name a middle school after Fred Yamamoto was made, at least in part, as a misguided attempt to promote unity in our community. What we have now is not unity, but the illusion of unity. By going to have a created by a vocal group campaigning from a standpoint rooted in historical atrocity unrelated to Palo Alto High School graduate and local war hero Fred Yamamoto, we are left with discord rather than harmony. What message does this send not only to Japanese Americans, but to our school community as a whole? We must be cautious to ensure we do not embolden those with attitudes that are not in keeping with American ideals and values appropriate in a public school district. If, as a community, we don't address this, we are in danger of facilitating prejudice and bigotry. In the school remaining process, hostility has been felt deeply by the Japanese American community in Palo Alto. Parents passed out flyers to our children on school ground that stated the name Yamamoto brings horrifying memories and pain. They attempted to organize a demonstration at City Hall that was subsequently canceled. They circulated online petition against name the school after Fred Yamamoto. This petition had anti-Japanese comments like, why do we give a Japanese name for an American school? Or, I cannot imagine that an American school named is Yamamoto. This has created an antagonistic atmosphere for Japanese Americans. The Japanese American community in Palo Alto is not large or so organized, but this group and other opposed to prejudiced viewpoint must still be heard.
As a pluralistic community and school district, what are we teaching our children? How can we justify the use of by any means possible, including denigrating a racial group to successfully accomplish goals? And given PAUSD's focus on social emotional learning, along with bullying prevention efforts, we believe that this behavior demonstrates both the great need for SEL programs to reach beyond the classroom and into our parent communities, and recognize the danger if our board and district leadership opt to be bystanders rather than upstanders in the face of behavior and attitudes that we would not tolerate if they occurred on our school campuses. We ask that the board not remain silent and call on our greater PAUSD community to actively embrace and model the American values of tolerance, compassion, empathy, and inclusion. We request that the board pass a resolution in keeping with the mission and values of public education by first acknowledging that the Japanese American community endured hostile, discriminatory, and hurtful treatment during the Renaming Our Schools debate in public forums, including the board meeting on March 27th, on flyers distributed on school grounds to both students and parents, in online discussion groups, and in the comments attached to the change.org petition. Secondly, affirming that the board does not endorse nor tolerate discrimination against any racial or ethnic group in our community, and will support anti-racism education and outreach efforts in our schools and broader community to build knowledge, understanding, and empathy. And third, form a district standing committee whose mission will be to promote and foster values and attitudes necessary for our multicultural community to thrive in accordance with American democratic values. This committee will reflect the diversity of our community and will work with district personnel, PTA Council, AACI, JACL, the Palo Alto Human Relations Commission, among other groups. The committee will develop forums and create opportunities for community dialogue on the issues that motivated the creation of the Renaming Our Schools Committee in the first place, and examine PAUSD policies, practices, programming, school culture, and curriculum as they relate to issues around human rights, diversity, and inclusion. We urge the board to place this resolution on the agenda for the board meeting of May 8th. If passed, we request that the resolution be distributed to parents in all the languages represented by our diverse community. We want to thank the board for giving us this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you provide a copy to the board of your statement? And anyone who's spoken or who hasn't spoken, I want to remind you that you can send us an email at board@pausd.org. That concludes open forum. I don't have any other cards. The next, is that right? Yeah, you don't. I don't, okay. The first item on our agenda is item B, resolution regarding Department of Rehabilitation contract augmentation. Mr. Ms. Hendricks.
Well, thank you. So this is regarding our transition partnership program, our work experience program, led by Dave Hoshawaro, who's here in the audience. This is a procedural commitment, really obligation. It's a two-step process. So we're being asked to basically approve a resolution that gives authorization for signature, and then also for approval to sign the standard agreement amendment. So I'd like to maybe take those one at a time if possible, and take a look at them and respond to any questions. So the resolution is the first document in this agenda item, and what I want to point out is it's authorizing me at this time to sign the amendment. One thing I also want to point out is it's authorizing me to sign the amendment, but I would also be signing this as the recording secretary for the board if the board approves it. So I'm not sure if the board would recommend a dual signature on that line or something on that order, but I wanted to point that out just in terms of process. So that is the first document that we'd be looking at for the Department of Rehabilitation, would be agreement for me to be able to sign the amendment. The last document in this packet after an overview of the services is the standard agreement amendment, and you'll see what that's reflecting is an increase from the state of California in the amount of $28,474 for programs and services. And once approved to be the signer through the resolution, I would sign this agreement as well. And so I'll be glad to take any questions or have Mr. Hoshawara respond further as he's in the audience.
Are there questions from board members on this item?
I'm just going to tell you that Ms. DiBrienza texted me. She's having trouble getting in, so she's not on right now.
Okay, thank you.
The board questions? So this item is notice for action, although I don't believe it appeared before. I think we could proceed with waiving the two-meeting rule if there's a motion.
I move we waive the two-meeting rule for this item.
Is there a second?
Second.
Student board member, preferential vote?
Aye.
I'm going to see if Mr. Brienza is on the phone. Mr. Brienza? Ms. Godfrey?
Aye.
Mr. Collins? Yes.
Aye.
That was Ms. Baton-Caswell, sorry. And I vote yes. So that passes by a vote of 4-0 with one absent at this point, Mr. Brienza. So the two-meeting rule is waived. Is there a motion to approve the actions as set forth in this item?
So moved.
Second, anyone? Second. Student board member, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Brienza? It's absent. Ms. Godfrey?
Aye.
Mr. Collins? Aye. Ms. Baton-Caswell?
Aye.
And I vote yes, so that those pass by a vote of 4-0. The next item is the bond project list, I believe. And that's the master plan project list, I'm sorry, and that's Ms. Hendricks.
Thank you. And as we transition, I just want to thank Mr. Hoshawara for the work he's doing on behalf of our students. It's greatly appreciated. It's making a difference. Thank you. So the meetings for facilities master planning update began in July 2017, continued through the fall and winter. We provided an update to the board in February. Since that time, there's been more work done to solicit increased input, including from communities, and to finalize plans. Tonight, we have Dr. Golden here to go ahead and lead the conversation on this item.
Thank you. First, let me remind that this is simply an information item. We're looking for input from the board members and the community as it relates to the planning that's been done over the past year. There'll be no vote taken. Let me present Tom Hodges. We want to make our presentation brief so as to allow time for maximal time for input.
Okay, so just for everybody's information, we have it down to like 29 slides. So what was in the packet was 64 slides. We're not going to go through all those, but we do have them if people have comments or questions. We can pull all the slides up if you have a question about a specific slide that I don't go over here. So tonight, we're really looking at it. This is an update of the master plan and the project list. We'll go through some of the projects that were done with the Strong Schools bond, so people have a clear understanding of our benchmark and where we're trying to move from here. Go over the approach that we used really briefly, and then we won't go through each of the site plans, but I'll basically go through elementary, middle schools, high schools of what scope is being proposed in general across the district facilities. Then after that, we're going to turn it over to you, provide a chance for you to give us your observations, feedback, maybe some starting points on priorities, some of the things you mentioned in February that, the impact or, the emphasis on the impact on students is a good example of, those are the things that we're really looking for so that when we go back to the sites and do prioritization at that level, we can basically relay that to them. So going forward, just on the Strong Schools bond, the emphasis at the elementary schools was really on increasing capacity. So we had the projects at Ohlone, Duvenik, and Fairmeadow, which created new classrooms, but we didn't really address the existing facilities as much. When we get to the Hoover project, that is basically a school-wide modernization and update. And again, that was because Hoover was not included in the previous bond program. And then at the other elementary schools projects we have conceptual designs for are the MP projects at El Carmelo and Escondido, which are on hold, but we're hoping to get those going after we present this project list. At the middle schools, the emphasis was also on adding classrooms. We added classrooms at Jordan and JLS. Also did a new cafetorium at Jordan. At JLS, we had a lot of drainage issues, infrastructure issues that we addressed throughout the campus. And then at Terman was a little different. There, the emphasis was more on a new library and the administration wing. There, if you remember, the administration was sort of back in the middle of campus, and they were having problems with people being able to walk halfway through campus without, anybody being able to see them. So that was a big part of the Terman project. And we will be looking at that as we move forward at the other two middle schools. At Gunn High School, we, again, first emphasis was increasing capacity so we could get to the 2,300 student capacity. We also had some athletic facilities projects at Gunn, including a new gym. And then the project that's going on now, the Central Building Project, that's basically providing a media arts facilities, a wellness center, and improving the music classroom facilities there. At Pali, again, another classroom wing to get us to the 2,300 student capacity, a new media arts center, the Pali PAC Performing Arts Center, and then the Perry Family Center, which addressed most of the athletic facilities that we have there. The two projects that are in progress are, we do have the Pali Science Edition project that is just coming out of DSA, and then we have the Pali Library, which is under construction and should be done by the end of the year. So with that, our approach since July when we kicked off this effort, the first thing we did was sit with the two advisory committees and developed an update of our educational specifications. I think the link was in the board enclosure if you want to read through the 1.5 inches of material, but it was really to establish a standard that we could take to all the sites and really try to address the parity and equity amongst all the different levels of the schools. So from that, in December, we started meeting with the individual school sites, coming up with site-specific plans, which you see in the packet, that are supposed to address, where we have deficiencies or needs with both the ed specs and then also just the age of the facilities. From there, we developed a list of projects where we could break down the scope, because obviously we can't do 100% of these improvements we came up with. So we put them into developable projects that we can address and prioritize as we move forward and determine what we're going to do next. And then the last month, we've been putting budgets together. So that's been our approach. Some things that before we talk about what we're proposing as far as improvements, the improvements that we have right now are, we haven't really had a lot of meetings with what we're going to do at the non-school sites. So Greendale, Cubberly, All those things, we have not had a ton of meetings about those. Those are things that I think we would like to hear from you, what your ideas are, and maybe give us a little guidance on how we move forward, because those aren't sites that have a constituency, right? We don't have principals and teachers generally there, other than at Greendale. Then a plan and strategy of how to, there's a state mandate that all public facilities have a net zero energy by 2030. So that is something that isn't necessarily one of your goals, but it is something that from a facility standpoint, we're gonna have to address. The growth strategy, so right now our master plan assumes that all the capacities at our existing sites are staying the same. So we haven't proposed any growth in capacity at any of our existing school sites, but that is where we have the opportunity to do so at the non-school sites right now. And then the last is just portables, just to keep in mind, portables on the campus are coming up on their 20th year. They're supposed to last about 25 years. So a good thing would be to know, do we want to replace those with permanent construction like was proposed in this bond? Or are we happy with just replacing them with portables as they come due to be replaced? So moving forward, looking at the elementary schools and the things that are being proposed there, just about every one of the sites except Nixon is, we have a new multi-purpose room building proposed where it'll emphasize or increase our ability to provide food service, indoor place for kids to eat, and then also provide a community asset that can be used beyond just the school day. Another, I guess, enhanced item is we have these 3 specialty or enrichment classrooms proposed at the elementary schools. These would be pull-out spaces for music, science and art, or maker space, any combination of those, but really spaces that can be sort of dedicated to that, so that the classrooms don't have to be shifted around for music, for example. Another thing we're proposing is a learning center and a resource center at each of the schools. So right now there are some schools like Addison that doesn't have a learning center or a resource center. Most of those kids have to go to Hayes. So we're trying to get to the goal of we have basically all the kids in that neighborhood or be able to go to their neighborhood school. Kinder classrooms, a lot of the kinder classrooms were designed for half day, and now that we have full day, we basically need 3 or 4 kinder classrooms at each school. And those are larger classrooms, like 1,300 square feet. So a lot of our plans reflect improvements to those kinder classrooms. There's air conditioning in all the classrooms as part of the plan, along with some envelope improvements like replacing windows and improving roof insulation, because no reason to put air conditioning in and spend all that money if you're not going to improve the envelope that you're trying to cool down. We do have administration building expansions to provide better supervision, more space for counseling and for wellness centers at the, well, that's more for the middle schools. Developing more collaborative working areas throughout the campus for both teachers and students. New accessible playgrounds. And then we do have the PV solar systems proposed at each of the school sites. So that's for the elementary schools. We put Barron Park up there because that was a good example of that. Almost all of those items are at Barron Park as a need. For the middle schools, the big projects being proposed are new libraries at Jordan and JLS, improving and enlarging the science labs at all 3 schools, reconfiguring and expanding the admin space for those wellness centers that we'd like to incorporate, reconfiguring classroom wings at Jordan to enhance the supervision and providing better eating opportunities. So right now at Jordan, they're kind of stuck in one corner, and it's very difficult campus to supervise. Updating locker and shower restroom facilities and developing new gender-neutral facilities in all the physical education areas, so the gymnasium buildings at all 3 schools, a new cafetorium and central kitchen at JLS, be a significant undertaking, and then also air conditioning classrooms, the existing classrooms that we would not be part of new construction. At Gunn High School, there's really two main projects that I'll touch on, and the rest are mostly modernization. But one would be to renovate the administration and student services buildings at the front of the school, reorient those buildings to where student services would be more the front door. With the central building project, when that comes online, it provides a brand new entry lobby and plaza that most of the students are going to come to. So they want to reorient the supervision and the front of the school, and then expand the food service capabilities where the administration is now, and provide a culinary lab and a futures lab over in those spaces. The other major project at Gunn would be at the art building. The art building is one that we haven't really touched in this last bond. So it's been proposed to tear down that building and build a new 2-story wing there that would have arts labs and then media arts labs up above, similar to what we've done elsewhere. Otherwise, there is there's some athletics facilities improvements out near the new gym and in Bow Gym. Again, lockers, gender neutral facilities, that theme would also be carried on there. A full modernization of Spangenberg. Right now, all we're doing is modernization of the lobby and the restroom spaces. This project would basically bring the rest of the theater up to current day standards. And then we do have some work with new science labs, 2 new science labs, and then also some CTE classrooms. If you read through the ed specs and what those labs are, they're a little larger and actually a little more multi-purpose we want them to be more flexible so more things can be taught in them. And the ones at Gunn are very specific. So that's what the improvements are there. So going through Pally, we have the Tower and Haymarket Theater renovations, which were also on the last one, but we never got to. I think they're looking at the tower, really trying to keep the character of that building, maybe keeping classrooms above and keeping it an administration wing is really what we've talked about there. Haymarket Theater, looking at whether it be a lecture center or a black box theater. Those are the 2 big ideas that have been put out there in the past. Tearing down what is called the 600 building now and building a new dining facility that would also house a wellness center and would connect to the tower building, kind of around that soccer field. And then the last would be not the last, but the last big project is the demolition of the 900 building and the wood shop and putting in a new CTE lab facility. Again, similar to Gunn, more flexible multi-use lab spaces. So those are really the improvements. If you look through all the slides, that's what you'll see over most of the campuses. The total cost of this draft plan is $1.18 billion, and that's for everything. Remember, this is a 20-year long-range plan, similar to what we did last time. So I think where this next step is between now and tonight's meeting and when we come back in June, the plan is that we hear your priorities, hear the site's priorities, and try to whittle that 1.8 down to a number that, in the next item, we start talking about how big is the bond, that sort of thing. So that's our next really big task that we have, and we're planning on coming back in June for that. And that's my presentation.
Good. I guess as far as our next task, first is to, I guess, come up with a commonality for the elementary sites, middle school sites, and high school sites so that we're building to a standard, so that we aren't doing some things at one elementary school, addressing some needs at one elementary school and other needs at other elementary schools, but rather a commonality as far as the district's concerned. We expect to be back for another presentation, probably at the second board meeting in May on this particular item. And again, the notion isn't to plan $1.1 billion, but rather to plan for this next phase. The bond issue that we're just finishing up is $378 million, and there'll be another phase. This is not going to, for lack of a better word, complete the schools, but rather it will be the next step in assisting, assisting the educational process with modern, up-to-date facilities.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brands is having technical trouble, so will be following along with us, but won't be participating. This item is for information, so we won't be taking action, but it sounds like staff is looking for input. We'll begin with Mr. Collins.
I don't have any comments or questions at this time.
Is that what's
Ms.
happening?
Baden-Caswell.
Well, I guess, I'm just assuming that there's no comments and questions because you're on the Facilities Committee.
I mean, I've studied the report and I've studied the, so
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of questions. The first one, first of all, thank you very much to the team. I think creating a standard for us to use across schools is really an important thing. I mean, we've talked about, progressive parity, but if you don't know what you're going for, it's hard to know whether you got there or not. So I think that's really important. I do think that actually, just take the high schools, for example, I do think the community will appreciate that you're planning a bigger investment at Gunn than at Pally, given how our investments have looked in the bond that we're working on right now. I'm wondering if we really believe that we don't need more space for more kids over the next 20 years, given that the Stanford GUP is going to add children, given that the city's comprehensive plan is going to add a lot of housing, which we assume is going to end up bringing children with it. So I'm interested, maybe I'll just ask my questions and then you can answer. I'm interested in how we're thinking about that. I see surplus spaces Cubberley right now, our surplus buildings, but I don't see Greendale as surplus because we're using it. We're just not using the whole area. So I think we should talk about that. I was surprised at the cost of the playgrounds, that we said we were going to bring all the playgrounds up to the new standard that we're setting for Addison. Is just costs gone up that much? Or are we doing something different on those playgrounds? I'll stop there. Why don't you answer those questions?
First, as it relates to growth, our crystal ball is very cloudy as it relates to 5 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. As far as the scope of the next building program, we expect that building program to behave the same way that this building program has taken place, in the sense that we will have a notion of projects for this particular next bond, if the board chooses to do another bond. Every single project will not be pre-approved as it relates to, in other words, when you vote for the bond, your job will, well, for lack of a better word, not be done. In other words, we simply run through that list. Rather, just as we did with this bond, every single project will need to be approved again by the board, every single project at every single site. And so therefore, should the need be for additional classrooms at different schools and so on and so forth, then at that time, the board will vote for that and the board will reprioritize. because we really can't do that. In other words, we can't do 10 years of priorities. We can't see 10 years in the future. So that's one answer. As it relates to Greendale, and actually as it relates to Cubberley, this has been, with all the meetings, this has been an incredible effort by Tom and his team. And I've sat in at some of the meetings and I've said some things, but an incredible effort. However, they've made no effort to plan Cubberley. And by extension, no effort to plan the next door Greendale site. Reason, because that activity, and by the way, it's going to be starting up. In fact, we're going to finally be coming to the board, and the city staff will be going to city council in June with a consultant to facilitate the planning of the Cubberley site. But until that happens, we don't know about Cubberley. So that's, and incidentally, if money needs to be carved out to do, if it's a very substantial work at Cubberley, it could easily be another bond to specifically do that. If it's less substantial, then we could examine, and the board could examine, carving it out of the proceeds of this bond and reprioritizing there. As far as Addison, let me pass that to Tom.
Okay. So at Addison, there was a couple things. One, it's a Magical Bridge playground that they are covering design costs and a lot of the costs that we're presuming in the future, we would be doing these all on our own. Now, if that isn't the case, then we get that money back, right? The other thing at Addison is we're going to have a clean slate. There's no demolition, there's no existing playground to tear out and put back in. So we've just been very conservative as far as if we were going to just do projects to do accessible playgrounds, that we would be starting from scratch and doing everything on our own. So that's why the big cost difference.
What was the cost for the Addison playground right now?
600,000, but originally it was more than that. But that's what, we're also very limited at Addison with the space that we have.
Okay. We're going to what?
We're getting half in a matching grant from the county.
Right. Okay. Okay.
Ms. Godfrey?
Thanks. I also was happy to hear about the standards across the different schools. I think you had said that before. I had the same question that Ms. Baton-Caswell had about growth planning, and of course, I know we don't have a crystal ball. So that leads me more towards some of the flexibility questions, so like the dedicated enrichment rooms at the elementary schools seem like something we've been kind of getting at just by having excess classroom space, and so I can understand why we want to have dedicated space. But if we get to a point where we have to have more classrooms, is that something, will they be built in a way that they could be
Yes.
reconfigured?
Yeah, so all three of them are fairly consistent in that they're about 1,200 square feet, so they'd have plenty of room. The big changes that are difference from the classrooms is the size, and then they'd have like 2 sinks, a lot more storage, like areas to dry out artwork, things like that.
So
but
would
they
they
could certainly be used as classrooms if we need it.
So they would be just one classroom. Are they big enough that they could be used as 2 classrooms? That they're not big enough for that?
No, it'd be 1 each, but there would be 3 of them total.
Okay.
1 for music, 1 for science art, 1 as a makerspace.
Okay. And it seemed like in the last bond, like we didn't have Hoover in the last bond, is that right? And that was just part of the project list that we didn't know was going to come up. How do you build in this project list that sort of a flexibility so that in case we have a school site that's, we don't know is going to be our school site?
Yeah, and the answer again is that we will either carve it out of, we will reprioritize the money in this bond, depending on what level it is. Alternatively, we'll need to do another bond. In other words, if this is to be, for instance, a $70 million or $100 million effort, then it would need to be a separate bond.
Okay, but if it's something like a replay of the Hoover question, and we have the money to do it, is there anything in the project list that we have to?
Yes, what I want to say is this. We're going to be presenting you with a reduced version of this $1.18 million.
Billion.
And that, or billion, yeah, and that will be our plan. There will be a full text of the ballot argument.
Okay.
There will be the 75 words and there'll be the full text. And embedded in that full text will be this entire menu of potential items. A good example of that is that in the previous bond, there was no notion whatsoever that we would buy a piece of property with the previous bond. There was no thought of that. It wasn't in any of the planning. However, in the full text of that last bond, and in fact, in the full text of this current bond, if the board should choose to put it on the ballot, it will say buy property for schools. Even though we have no notion of where that might be, and even though at this point in time that seems very far-fetched. And so in the same way, all of these projects, all of the projects that are here will be in the full text of the bond, but they won't necessarily be in the initial planning for spending bond money.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're learning from our past iterations of this. And my last question is one that I've asked you before, I believe, about looking at schools that are being built other places from scratch and what we could learn about what the 22nd century school looks like.
Sure. So I think we had a meeting with the two architects and us, and we just addressed that because we knew it was going to come up. And I think, you know, we're at such a conceptual level right now. I mean, we really don't have design concepts that we would say, okay, these are what we plan on doing. What I have done, though, is these collaborative spaces I talked about. A lot of the schools that sort of these forward-thinking schools out there, they have a lot of pull-out spaces, flexible spaces that could be used multiple ways, breakout spaces adjacent to that are both exterior and interior. I mean, these are things that we've kind of written in that ed spec that we want to incorporate when we actually get to designing these facilities. So the big thing I've done is in the cost has that, there is cost in there to do these. It's really, instead of thinking of a classroom and the cost of a classroom as 1,000 square feet, it's the 1,000 square feet plus the covered outdoor area next to it and the outdoor learning area. And that's where circulation space, we've tried to increase circulation space just for that reason. So that we start having that flexibility when it comes to the cost during design to do some of these more forward-thinking concepts moving forward.
Okay, great, thank you. That's it for me.
Mr. Islas, any questions?
No, I have no questions.
Mr. Irwin?
No comment.
So thank you for the presentation. What I heard from Dr. Colton is that the question of prioritization is an initial question for paring this down to a list that we're going to put forward as the kind of first things that we would expect to do and hope to do unless something changes in our thinking, but that that prioritization we're going to be around to do, or somebody's going to be around to do in the future based on the current needs at that time. What impresses me is the fact that you've identified, probably without a whole lot of effort, $1.2 billion worth of projects that are worthwhile to do. We are not going to do anything like $1.2 billion worth of projects, so that when the public does see the amount of the bond, it's probably going to seem like a pretty substantial amount of money. But I think what's important to realize is that that reflects some careful prioritization over the course of the next, many years from among a lot of deserving projects. And I think that's the takeaway for me.
And then just a comment on that. This $378 million, these $378 million that was committed in 2008 has been spent in some ways, most ways anticipated, some ways that weren't anticipated in 2008. But they've upgraded our schools, our facilities for our children. And so we anticipate that the next bond, when it happens, will continue that, and will make these sites better.
Yeah, then that's a real important characteristic of that flexibility. It's going to be really valuable over time, as it has been. Further comments, Mr. Collins?
Just one minor, I guess, amendment, editorial to, on your comment, Mr. Dauber. I didn't want to leave people with the wrong impression. I think, while they could have identified 1.2 billion without a lot of effort, in fact, there was a tremendous amount of effort that went into this. And I particularly want to point out, it wasn't just, in addition to the people sitting here, there were many of our administrative teams and site leaders involved, and this reflects very much, I think, their views and priorities. This is not a district office, paper and pencil exercise. This is a site by site. This is like, hand-to-hand combat, door-to-door, house-to-house, and I think reflects that. I mean, I'm very glad that we undertook such a significant, long effort to identify the projects, because that's the only way we can.
Yeah, and I don't want to suggest at all.
I didn't think you were.
No, I don't want to suggest at all that it was an easy effort. What I wanted to suggest, and I think I maybe didn't express it well, is that I don't think you had to sort of dig deep in fine marginal projects to fill out a number. I think these projects, at least as I hear it, are really all valuable projects. Thanks for clarifying that.
Can I just add one thing to that? We compare ourselves to districts across the country and the world that have much fancier and robust facilities than we have. And, we try to keep we try to build to the promise of our kids, but we're limited in what we can do. So, I don't think, if you look at this, nothing here seems like a boondoggle. It all seems like things that we're going to have to do at some point or another. I think that's an important thing to share with the community.
I have one card, Robert Smith, public comment on this item. Mr. Smith.
Sure. No, stay here.
Thank you very much, Robert Smith. I'm here to suggest that I think this is poorly timed. And a couple of reasons for that in general are, number one, the federal tax codes have changed, as I'm sure you're all aware, and that change will mean that people will not be able to necessarily deduct as much from their federal income tax in the way of local and state taxes as they used to be able to do. As we head toward November, with the end of the year in sight, people are going to be thinking a lot more about that, and they're going to be wondering, is this really the time that I want to commit myself to pay more taxes? Until I at least understand what's going on. Now, maybe a year or two from now, it will be clear. But that's something you don't control, or at least aren't responsible for. The other major set of reasons is, I think, for reasons of luck or whatever, you've had a large number of problems that have served to undermine trust in the community. Let me briefly list 4 areas. Title IX, the budget, the great changes in staffing, and the recent renaming. All of these things have left people with very different reasons annoyed, frankly. And I've been quite surprised at some of the things I've heard from people that reflect, I think, a need for stability and a need to present that you have gotten it right now, that we have the team that we need, that we're really controlling that budget, and things in the other areas as well, and probably some other ones too, before you go out asking for more money, because it's likely to be that people will combine together the various things in this perhaps perfect storm that you're looking at, and say, I'm not ready to give them more money right now. And it's not, at that point, it's not even something that they're necessarily going to look at what you're going to spend it on. And by the way, it may be a little bit of a worry that it's such an open situation anyway that you haven't completely committed to. If my student is going to gun and I see all these good things that are going to happen to gun, I want them to happen to gun. You know, I don't want the priorities to shift. So that could be a problem. Anyway, just a thought, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And I'll point out that our next item, and maybe we could segue to that, is actually about the public perception of the bond and some of the issues. So if there are no further comments, I suggest that that anyone who has other comments and also in the community forward them to Dr. Galton to take into account in the good work that this group continues to do. Let's move on to our next item, which is the evaluation of a ballot measure authorizing the 2018 school bond. Ms. Hendricks.
Thank you. So in February, the Board of Education approved our exploration. Whoops, there we go. Approved our exploration of placing another bond authorization on the November 2018 ballot. So after discussion tonight, if there's a recommendation to do so, we would be preparing to come back to the May 8th meeting with some specific next steps. Those would include authorization to further develop the project list, authorization to develop a resolution calling for the election in November 18, and authorization of expenditures up to $30,000 for services at this time. So Dr. Galton is going to be sharing with us some further information as well as the results of the opinion survey regarding a potential upcoming bond issue. So Dr. Galton?
Thank you. Let me introduce Charles Heath with TBWB, who I think most of the board members know, and Jean Bregman, whose firm did an opinion poll at the end of March. Jean, I don't know if you all know Jean, however, he has been doing these polls since 2000, Jean? Oh, 1994. All right. And it's different than 1994. So at any rate, but the fact remains he provides a nice kind of longitudinal listing of results on certain questions and so on. So Charles, why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you, Bob. So we started this process back in March to quickly get up to speed on the work that Mr. Hodges and Mr. Galton have been doing to think about the next phase of facility improvements that may be needed here in Palo Alto. We've also worked with the district's financial advisors to understand the bonding capacity that exists and to evaluate potential election dates. As we have started the process for each of the prior successful parcel tax and bond measures, I've worked on 4 successful parcel taxes in PAUSD, as well as the 2008 successful strong schools bond. We started this process by doing a feasibility assessment, where we take a look at the options for when we might conduct an election, look at options for how we might structure and size and scale a measure, look at the priorities that might be addressed by a measure, and then conduct some opinion research in the community in order to generate some statistically reliable data about the priorities and opinions and perceptions of your voters that would help us inform strategic decisions about taking a measure to the ballot. In working with staff and your consultants, we worked to develop a survey to test those different options. Over the last few weeks, Mr. Bregman has completed that survey. He's going to summarize the data for you, and then I'll be back to talk a little bit about some of the key takeaways from that data and what we recommend in terms of next steps. So with that, Mr. Bregman.
Hi there. Well, nice to be back again. Since '94, when I first came here, I was just getting out of 6th grade. Let me tell you a little bit about what we did in the poll. We interviewed 400 people who, based on their voting history, could be defined as likely to actually go to the polls and vote in this November. 78% of them are permanent absentee ballot voters. 56% were interviewed on their cell phones. Only about 1 in 4 had a child in the public schools in the district. And by party, 57% registered Democrats, 14% Republicans, and the remaining 29% were independents, declined to state, or others. And we know those are reflective of the actual likely voter universe. So what I'm going to do is just going to go over briefly the sort of highlights of the results of the survey. Oh, good, it worked. First question we asked was, how would you give an overall rating to the job being done by the Palo Alto Unified School District? And here you see the 8 studies we've done over those last years. It's always been extraordinarily high. It's still very high. It's still higher than just about any district I have a poll in. It's just slightly lower than it was. people who have the kids in the schools were at 81% excellent or good ratings. But before you worry too much about a decrease from the 79 and 82 of a few years ago, we should look at chart 2, which also tracks, but this tracks in the red numbers the poor ratings, which are virtually non-existent still, but the no opinion, which has gone up to its highest level it's ever been at 22%. And that's partially a reflection of more people who have lived in the district for a shorter period of time. More changing demographics in that sense of the people, and so more likely to not have an opinion because they just don't know, they haven't been here long enough. So people who are more likely to have no opinion are the ones without kids in the schools, people who have been here for less than 10 years, and people who are under 40 years of age, which is a reflection of that. But it's also interesting in those under 40s, not one of them gave the district a poor rating. Chart 3, we asked people, since bond talks about repairs and rehabilitations, trying to get an idea what people know at this point. And since there really hasn't been a whole heck of a lot of publicity about this at this point, how much need is there for repair and rehabilitation of local Palo Alto public schools? And 47% says there's been a great need or some need, a high 24% with no opinion. And so at this point, there's still work to be done, obviously. You want people to know before they go to the polls that there's need, but I'm not too concerned about this at this point, that we don't have higher numbers yet. And then after those questions, we went to our ballot questions. And I'll summarize these quickly. We started out, we read people something similar to the 75 words they would actually see on the ballot when they went to vote. And we talked about in the first set, let's look at those first 3 sets of bars. It was a $480 million bond with a $45 per 100,000 of assessed value tax rate to be paid back over 36 years, and then talked about what the bond would do. And we start out at 59%, which is fine. And remember, we need only 55% on a bond. We don't need 2/3 like you do on the parcel tax. Then after we told people how the money could be used, reasons to support it, we asked again, and it went up to 64%. And then the final vote is after we then told them some of the negatives, some reasons why people would give for not voting for it, and we just lost 1 point. So we're still at 63% at the end. We're still 8 points beyond where we need to be on Election Day. The second set was the alternative, essentially for anybody who hadn't said yes to the $480 million, $45 tax rate. We then said, well, how about if it was $375 million with a $35 tax rate? And it did go up a bit. It went to 59, went up to 64, and at the end, the 63 went up to 66. The people who are more likely to vote yes are renters, people who, even though they know less about the district, people who've lived here for less than 10 years, and the younger voters are more likely to vote yes throughout on all the votes, and of course, Democrats. Then, after this, we started with the questions. As I mentioned, we're giving people more information. First, we actually had a list of 16 different possible uses for bond money. And we asked people to rate each one as being very important, somewhat not too, or not at all important. These were the 5 top scoring items when you look at just the top score, just the very important. And we had 5 of them that were very important to a majority of people. Making sure all school facilities are accessible for students with disabilities, upgrading schools to current seismic safety standards, replacing old roofs, increasing school safety and security, and providing classrooms and labs to support up-to-date science, technology, engineering, and robotics. But this does not mean that the others were not important. As we see in the next, with the other 11 items, we see that even in the 40s, for that whole first group of half a dozen, that's all people who say things are, this is still, everything is important. Even that bottom one the one that improving cafeterias, covered outdoor eating areas and playgrounds for student health and safety, which got only a 26% very important. When you add in the somewhat important to them, it becomes 73%. So everything is at least somewhat important to most everybody. One interesting thing and difference to me was the item M about counselors, improve and expand facilities for school counselors who are so important for the health and safety of many of our students. And that was more important to younger people under 40, people who were interviewed on their cell phones, people who've lived here for less than 10 years, and renters. It was just an interesting fact. Then we have the second set of questions before that second vote, the positives, the reasons that people would support the bond measure, and they rated each one of these 9 items as, does it make you much more likely to support the bond, somewhat more likely to have no effect on your opinion one way or the other. As always, in just about every one of the hundreds of polls I've done for school districts, cities, counties, agencies, whatever, item A is the #1 item, because none of the money can be taken away by the state for other school districts. All the money raised by this measure will stay here in our local community to be used by our local schools. It's local money, it stays here locally. You know every penny will be spent by the district for our kids. The others are all in the 29 to 36 range. It's okay. What it says to me mostly is that people are more concerned about the specifics of how the money is going to be used than they are about the sort of general reasons to support it, with perhaps that one exception. And then the last chart is the reasons much more like to oppose the measure. First thing is, you know that all of these are lower than even the worst of the arguments in favor, and none of them are particularly effective. They range from 21 to 25% saying to be much more likely to oppose the bond measure, led by we're still paying off the old bonds. We can't afford it with the recent changes in federal tax laws, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they're all pretty low scoring, and none of them would I say, if I were wanted to worry about somebody running a campaign, where I'd say, we got a problem with this one, we have to really address this one. Everything needs to be addressed. Of course, people need to know and have confidence in the district, but none of these is a real excessive problem. And of course, Republicans thought most of these were more important. And people under 40, less likely to say every one of these would make them much more likely to oppose. And so our last chart really is just a repeat of the earlier one, which shows our votes, just to sort of to remind ourselves where we were. We started out at 59% on the highest tax rate and highest bond, went up to 64, ended at 63 after people had heard positives and negatives, and on the lower amount at 64 going up to 66 at the end. So just in general, I would say that as I usually expect, I think you're in pretty good shape for going for whatever you decide to want to go for within these choices. I would not necessarily shy away from the higher amount. The questions, or Charles, you want to? Sure. Yeah. I'll let Charles sum up first.
Thank you, Gene. So as Gene suggested, we see a path for success here to a successful November bond measure. At the higher $480 million bond amount, we're consistently 48 percentage points above the 55% threshold required for passage. At the lower bond amount, we have a more comfortable margin. We're 9 to 11 percentage points above the passage threshold. By means of comparison, the last time we presented similar poll results to this to the board was in 2015, prior to the last parcel tax renewal. And at that time, our polling had us just 3 percentage points above the 2/3 threshold required for the passage of that parcel tax. So relative to the passage threshold, we're actually in a stronger position today than we were for that parcel tax that passed comfortably with 77%. In addition, as you saw, voters prioritize the list of projects that are contemplated for this bond. I mean, we can take some of this data and use it to refine some of the information that Mr. Hodges is working on that will become your bond project list. And also, as we introduced additional information about the bond, we saw support grow, and the negative arguments that I think reflect some of the controversy that's occurred in the community recently do not seem to be an insurmountable obstacle to passing a bond measure. So with that recommendation provided, we've concluded our feasibility study related to a potential bond measure. The next steps, should you give us direction to move forward, would be to start providing some informational messaging in the community. We saw a couple of points in the survey here where there were some information gaps. Fewer people able to rate the job the school district is doing compared to what we've seen in the past, and also about a quarter of the electorate telling us that they couldn't rate the need for funding facility improvements. So that tells me that there's an opportunity there to get some messaging out, some information, and fill some of those gaps. So that would be our most immediate priority, and then also to work with your bond advisors to develop that bond resolution that's been discussed here tonight, and bring that back to you for consideration at your June 5th meeting for a first reading, and at your June 19th meeting for final adoption. All of that keeps us on track to meet the August 10th deadline for the board to deliver a adopted resolution to the county registrar of voters for placement of a ballot measure on the November ballot. And then following that, an independent advocacy campaign would take the lead in the process, driven by volunteers, using private resources to complete the process through to Election Day. So that's our report, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Let me add just one comment. I guess a question is, why now and why not in 2020? We don't know what the economy will be like in 2020. We don't have a sense of what will be on ballot measures at local or state level in 2020 to compete with our bond. What I do know, and I can't advise you on these other things, but the behavior of this bond program, it's been very successful and spotless in terms of its audits and its product. What we will be doing if there isn't a bond right now is we will be spending the last of our money. And we'll focus on that and making sure that we have enough money to close out the projects that Tom mentioned. On the other hand, if we have this bond, then we won't be closing out this bond program, but rather we'll be spending our money on planning, on doing plans and being ready to hit the ground running in 2020 with more projects. We'll be starting on the projects that Tom enumerated because the planning process, the architect process, the DSA process means there's about a year and a half delay before these projects can get built. So at any rate, I can't make a judgment as far as when to do this. I can simply tell you the way that this bond program will respond one way or the other. I guess the other comment, and I was saying, should I say this? But I'm going to say it. Do we even need to do this bond? Do we even need to do more building? And I'm saying a real fringe benefit of working here is I'm incredibly proud of this school district. By a lot of metrics, by a lot of polls for what they're worth, this is the #1 school district in the state, and these two high schools are the real standard of excellence. But so they are already. So maybe we don't need anything else. But the trouble is, Stanford doesn't believe that. Stanford, with its excellent ratings, believes they need to build. All of the high-tech firms believe they need to provide the best possible facilities for their employees, and so our students deserve it as well.
Thank you, Dr. Colton. So what is, I think everyone shares those sentiments. Thank you. This item is for discussion. On the next meeting, we will be asked, as per this item, to authorize staff to continue with the development of the project list that we heard discussed in the last item, and to develop a resolution and to spend $30,000 on taking the next steps, as our consultants described. So I suggest that we focus our questions and comments on what we need to do in order to decide to take action at the next meeting, if anything. And Ms. Godfrey, you can start us off.
Oh, I get to start. Yay. Thank you. Thank you for doing this for so many years. I saw that 1994 on here, and I thought that can't possibly be the same person having done this so many times, but I hope we haven't abused you too much along the way. I have a couple of comments and then some questions. I think Mr. Smith brought up a good issue, and I believe that you asked some questions around the potential for the new tax law and how people feel about that, and some of the other things that might that might discourage folks from wanting to support this.
Right.
So can you remind me?
Well, there were two. There's one was with the recent changes to federal tax laws, Californians will be paying much more in taxes with fewer deductions. We can't afford another tax increase. Only 25% were much more likely to oppose the measure because of that. And then the other one is last September, the superintendent of schools left after accusations of fiscal mismanagement and for mishandling reports of sexual assault at district schools. We should not have to pay for the mistakes made under the leadership of the last superintendent. That was even lower at 22%.
Okay, great. So I appreciate Mr. Smith bringing those up, and I appreciate that you'd already incorporated those. I know in some of the cases, like in my mind, and the Title IX work that we're doing now is a little bit like ripping the scab off a wound, and that's always messy, and we're trying to get ourselves on track to be excellent at that work, but in the meantime, I'm sure it is on people's minds as you talk to them about these things. I didn't quite understand between Chart 1 and Chart 2. Were those things additive? So like if I looked at April 2018 for Chart 1 and it was 63%, and on the next one it's 22% no opinion and 3% poor ratings, is that
Right.
supposed to add up to 100?
No.
Okay.
We're
What's
missing the only fair rating.
Oh, the fair rating.
Right, it's left out.
Okay.
Right, the ratings were, the scale was excellent, good, fair, poor.
Okay.
So we are.
The gap is fair.
Yeah, so there'll be a few people who.
That would be awesome as a stacked bar, all on one chart. All four of them.
Mhm.
Just for grins. Okay, and then the other thing that Charles said was, when we did the polling for the parcel tax, the polling suggested about 3 points higher than the actual outcome. What are some of the stats? No, what'd you say?
No, what he said was the poll had us 3 points above the threshold you needed for success, ended up 10 points higher than what you needed for success. So
Okay.
you needed 67, the poll said 70, you ended with 77.
Okay.
On election day.
And do we have similar stats for the last bond? What's the similar?
From the last bond 10 years ago.
2007 poll right here.
Well, there you go. I don't remember what the actual.
I was just trying to figure out how
election day was.
predictive it is for bonds.
June 2008. I mean, the ultimate election was 78%, Bob? So we were significantly above the 55% mark, and I believe.
74
In the poll.
74.
Okay, so that's pretty close.
Okay, so the ultimate was 78 and the poll was 74.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's good. I'm pleased with that.
Okay, sounds like my time is up.
Mr. Collins.
Thank you. A couple of questions, I guess, for Charles. Charles, why can't we do this in 2019?
Because Prop 39, which is the state law that allows us to pass bonds at 55%, requires these measures to be on the ballot at the same time as a regularly scheduled statewide election. So June, November, actually in 2020, March, June, and November are the available election dates. But off-year special elections, like are available for parcel taxes, can't be used for bonds.
Okay, so we'd have to wait until 2020, March or later, And really, to give the voters a fair chance, we'd be probably looking at November of 2020. Okay. Given that we're looking at Prop 55 bonds, how many Prop 55 bonds have failed in the Bay Area, say, since Prop 50? How long have Prop 55 bonds been around? How many have failed?
The first ones were on the ballot in 2002 because it was Prop 39, which lowered the threshold to 55%, was passed in November of 2000.
Prop 55, Prop 39, sorry.
Then there's been Prop 39 since then, so it's all very confusing. I don't know the specific Bay Area passage rate, but it's very high. Statewide, the passage rate for Prop 39 bonds is about 80%. I can tell you, my firm, we had 44 Prop 39 bonds on the ballot in 2016, and all of them were successful.
Okay. So high rate of success. And then for either of you, I mean, these numbers are good. How do these numbers are useful. We look at ourselves longitudinally. How do these compare to other high-performing districts in Santa Clara, San Mateo County, in the Bay Area? How do we stack?
These are strong numbers, and we have seen some softening in support for bond measures generally within the last few months because a new state law went into effect after the first of the year that requires some additional detail to be placed in the ballot question. And we've actually seen that some of that detail causes some confusion as it softened the numbers a little bit. But in other parts of the state, more conservative parts of the state, we've seen support dipping below the 55% mark. As I mentioned earlier, you're comfortably above 55%, which is what gives us confidence you can move forward with this measure.
Thank you. There was something I noted comparing with the 2007 poll. In the 2007 poll, it very explicitly says we told people either nothing about the tax rate consequence, or we told them the property tax rates would continue at current levels, which they would have if we had used capital appreciation bonds exclusively, which we ended up, the board prior to my joining decided not to do. Right. That's in stark contrast to the language I think that was in the current poll, which called out the $35 or $45 per 100,000 additional tax that would be on. And still the numbers are, 10-ish points lower. Which is interesting considering we actually told people it would cost money, which before we basically told them that it wouldn't.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. My view is, like Ms. Godfrey said, I think Mr. Smith's comments, which I've heard similar from others, including people close to the district. Can I just,
of course,
if I finish? Are telling and important. I think I am second to none in my disappointment in the district for some of the management and financial missteps that we've had the last few months and couple of years. And so I think there is a lot of work to be done. I do believe, though, that the benefit for the students from continuing our building program and continuing it in a steady and predictable way is very, very high. The idea that we go on periodic bond binges where we build like crazy for 10 years and then take a decade or two off, I think is, for me, an outmoded and not very effective way of doing business. And, we end up with dilapidated facilities until we get around to fixing them, and then hopefully they get snuck into the current bond and not pushed off to the next one, which will be who knows when. And I would love to see us go to more of a continuous process of facility improvement and maintenance, with perhaps more smaller bonds more frequently approved, so that we can keep the ball rolling instead of doing big binges. So I think passing a bond in 2018 would be consistent with that approach, and I think good for students. Thanks for letting me finish.
Ms. Bain-Caswell.
A couple of questions. What percentage of the voters in Palo Alto, the ones that are actively voting, are above 40 years old? And what percentage are below 40 years old? Because you said several times the below 40s.
Right. Let's see, under 40 was 22%.
Okay, so the majority of our voters are above 40 years old.
Right. 34% are over 65, which is not atypical.
Okay, and did you see for the over 65s any particular trends? You brought up trends for.
No, they're supportive of kids in schools generally. I mean, the only real difference was that the younger folks were even more so.
Okay. In terms of the cost of what taxpayers are paying per $100,000 of assessed valuation, can you just talk about what the cost would be over time?
For the proposed measure or for the existing measure?
For the existing and then adding on the proposed.
So we tested a negative argument about the fact that this would be on top of existing bonds that taxpayers are already paying off. We didn't specifically name the rate, although embedded in the ballot questions that we asked at the two levels were the $45 and $35 per $100,000 tax rates. So together they had a sense of the overall cost, but we didn't name the number they're currently paying.
I seem to remember that last time we had complicated charts that were curves that showed how it changed over time. Have we done anything like that at this point?
Well, that wouldn't be in this poll. In other words, those charts wouldn't be a part of the poll.
So we
yes.
haven't done the, that's why I'm looking at you rather than our pollster.
No, not yet.
Expertise.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the numbers that were in the poll were developed by Dave Olson, the district's financial advisor from PFM, and it's based on that same analysis that shows, you know, what is the debt service required to repay $480 million in bonds or $375 million in bonds, and that's how we arrived at these tax rates. But I think part of the plan of bringing the resolutions back to you would be also that financing plan that would be presented by the financial advisors.
So for the next meeting, will we see some sort of chart like that? I think the debt service on our current bond is interesting to our community.
Yes, yes, we will provide that.
Okay. And then, Dr. Golden, have we had,
I noticed that Dave is drifting up. So that's Dave Olson, our FA with PFM.
Okay.
Just to make a quick comment on that, the district has a bond repayment schedule, which is more conservative than most school districts around the state. You pay off your bonds in 20 years. The current tax rate is a little bit less than $80 combined between past bond measures per 100,000. And as a result, looking at the poll results, I would think that we'd, at least one of the options we'd prepare would have a lower impact over the next 20 years and a little higher impact after that to keep the combined rate a little bit lower. So the whole $45 wouldn't add on top of the current 80.
I think that was important last time to talk about, and I think we need to understand it this time. So thank you. The other question, Dr. Golden, have we had any community members tell us that they're interested in being involved in this kind of effort?
This is a very preliminary time. And by the way, one of the misstatements in our goal was that we were going to initiate a campaign. The goals that were presented at the beginning of the year, I managed to finally get it out of that statement because that in fact is illegal.
Right.
And so no, we have not engaged in any campaigning at this time, and we have no intention to do so.
Okay. And we don't know that no one's come forward and said, hey, if you're going to do bond, call me up. No one said that yet.
Somebody will say that.
If anybody wants to say that, please come and tell us.
Call Melissa, yeah.
Call us. And then can I just ask one last question?
Yeah, just one more.
Okay. When you stop a bond program and then start it up again, what would you say the cost to the district is of that?
The cost is really in terms of time, and incidentally, in this particular world, time is money because we did a rating presentation today, and the positive explosion in housing prices is really something to believe. And by the way, there's a similar explosion in construction costs because there are too many projects chasing too few contractors. So the cost is time because if a bond is planned, then we are going to be spending remaining parts of this money and then the new bond in pushing forward with designing projects and getting those projects ready to build. On the other hand, without a bond, will be engaged, frankly, in shutting down the program.
Thank you, Dr. Golton. Mr. Islas, any comments? Mr. Arun?
Yeah, so I do have a few comments. First of all, I want to thank you for the presentation. I don't know, being on the board, I've learned a lot about bonds in the past year. And at least from my own personal opinion, since you're talking about the explosion of construction costs especially, do you think that's going to keep going up in the next few years?
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that there is a tremendous building boom taking place now. And building in commercial as well as residential.
Okay,
So-
that makes sense. And I know if we're already working on teacher housing and a bunch of other school improvement sites, school improvement projects, and we're already going to need to engage in building costs. So that's just, yeah. Looking at the data itself, I know one of the slides talks about the need for repair and rehabilitation of public schools, and the biggest part of that pie chart was 39% for some need for improvement. I think my observation is that for that, I think just talking to other students about what they feel about campuses and talking to my mom about elementary school and whatever, I think the general consensus, at least among people I've talked to, is there's a bunch of little things that people want to see improved, but I don't think it's a major factor of their education, at least for students. I know at least at Gunn, we've been in a state of construction for the past year and a half. We're sort of tired of it, and I think, of course, building and renovating is always a good thing, but in terms of renovation itself, I think more people don't really see as much of a need anymore because we've already had a big building splurge. So I don't know. That's my own observation, at least at Gunn. In regards to a lot of the negatives, those of us who did not want to support the bond measure, looking at the rating, seeing as they're all 25% or under, my first, I guess, thought is there's a lot of different reasons why people would oppose it, but there's no really one big stickler against it. So I'm thinking that opposition is actually much lower than we might think, simply because everyone has different reasons for why they're opposed, and it's not one united reason for this is exactly why we should not have a bond. At least in regards to reasons for why people should support the bond, when was this data collected and finalized?
When
It was, I think we started the interviewing the last couple of days of March and through the first week or so of April.
Okay. Yeah, I was actually only wondering about the improvement criteria of increasing school safety and security by replacing antiquated fire alarms, door locks, and whatever. I was wondering if this happened before or after the Parkland shooting and how that might have affected opinions. But since it was after, I'm guessing then it was a jump from what it would have been in February. Yeah. Okay, that's just my own observation. I think aside from that, I think continuing building and renovation in all of our schools probably is a better indicator to our community that we're constantly investing in our students in our district than a building splurge and then a wait time and then another building splurge. And I think seeing as, at least according to this presentation and the data, we're on schedule with all of our building projects from the last Strong Schools bond, I think, there's no reason to say no to another bond in terms of, the fact that we have a good track record and we have a great shot at improving our school district in the next few years. So, yeah, that's all.
Okay, so I don't have any comments or questions, so why don't we take the public comment, Mary Pat O'Connell, and then we will move on to the next item, which also concerns bonds.
Good evening, members of the school board. I only wanted to take a moment to point out that I think we've done a fantastic job improving the facilities at our secondary schools, and that has been very important. I would like to remind everyone that the multipurpose rooms at all of the elementary schools, with the exception of Nixon, are desperately in need of improvement. And so I hope that that will certainly be considered in your decisions. Thank you.
And those are actually part of the facilities master plan list, figured prominently, I think, so thank you. All right, let's move on then to item E, which is discussion of a resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of bonds not to exceed $40 million. Ms. Hendricks, or
Thank you.
whoever
In the
would-
interest of time, I'll go ahead and turn it right over to Dr. Golton and
And in the interest of time, I'll turn it over to Dave Olson, our financial advisor, who has a brief PowerPoint presentation.
But we're going to go through it pretty briefly here, but I did want to spend a minute talking about the bond program broadly and to mention a few specific things about the resolution. If I can editorial comment really quickly, I think the idea of investing in your school facilities on an ongoing and consistent basis, as Board Member Collins says, is the most important thing you can do. It's going to allow these projects to get done more economically and create less risk in an event the political climate changes over time. So the resolution before you tonight for review and discussion involves the issuance of $40 million of the 2008 Measure A Strong Schools bond in the amount of $40 million. It's my understanding that if with a positive outcome tonight, the resolution will be back on May 8th for approval. We'll be selling bonds on May 22nd, and you'll have money in the bank at the beginning of June. This is going to be the 6th bond issue under the Strong Schools bond. You can see from this chart a couple of things I wanted to point out is we've started to regularize our issuance. So 2014, 2016, 2018, and the amounts, 40 million, 45 million, 40 million. Those amounts could be a little larger. You'll have about a little bit less than 40 million to issue the next time and still be sustainable. But I like the kind of normalization of the process. I also added a comment here with the percentage of bonds outstanding. Most bond issues pay out about 10% of their principal amount in the first 10 years, most as issued by California school districts. You're paying off almost half in the first several years. It makes money a lot cheaper to you, and I'm going to come back to that point on a number of occasions. So I like a lot of things that we're doing with the program. Projects to date, you know, I appreciate the presentation here, so I didn't want to go in much detail, but it's really transformed the district over the past 10 years, not only at the high school sites, but you know, at all the middle school sites and a good number of the elementary schools. One of the things we want to do when we take a look at the next series of bonds is look out over the next 3 years worth of expenditures. Current balance as of the end of the last calendar year was $40 million. We have plans to expend the money, so it makes sense to issue the bonds, particularly in an interest rate environment that's where rates are rising. We don't want to make that a central component of our advice on bond issuance. We want everything driven by construction programs. But I think on the margins, it makes a difference. A few things I want to make sure everybody knew. That this is things I like about the program. 20-year maximum maturity is short relative to California school district financings. 30 is pretty common. 40 is not as unusual as you would think. So that makes money a lot cheaper, allows us to borrow at repayment ratios, the principal and interest, 1.4 to 1. 1.85 to 2.15 are the most common. That means for like this $40 million financing, we'll be paying $56 million. The typical, or your taxpayers will, typical financing are paying $75 to $85 million. So it's $30 million cheaper than your neighboring school districts, this financing over time. Bonds are likely to be rated AAA by both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. We're meeting with the rating agencies this Friday. There are, you know, eight school districts in the state that are rated AAA by both. Selling the bonds by competitive sale, we're going to get bids from everybody who bids on any of these transactions. It's going to be a real attractive financing. And unlike other school districts throughout the state district, moving forward on a sustainable basis. If you're spending $20 or $30 million a year, even if you get up to $40 million a year, which is, you know, we might do with the next bond issue, through time, we'll be able to keep the tax rates in a pretty narrow band between $80 and $100 per 100,000, and the amount of debt you have outstanding as a percentage of your tax base will stay relatively constant. So this is a program that can sustain itself on an ongoing basis into the indefinite future. And that's really where I think we need to be moving in California school bonds. In terms of debt structure, this looks at the 2008 measure. We were asked about this earlier. The yellow bars represent the amount of debt service on bonds that have already been issued. The green bars represent the new debt we'll be adding. Obviously, we're leaving space 2 years from now for the next issue, and we're paying mostly, and we're front-loading as much of the debt service as we can. So again, we're trying to keep borrowing costs as low as possible, pay off bonds as quickly as possible. The interest rates, I talked about rising rates. This I handed into a week ago, and we're probably 10 or 15 basis points higher than this now. But you can see that we continue to be in a relatively low interest rate environment. If you look just at the top over the past 12 years, not as low as we were in 2013 and 14, but lower than almost any time before that. It's a good interest rate environment despite the increases. The resolution that's under consideration tonight, I describe it as achieving 4 specific objectives. It authorizes the sale of the bonds in the amount not to exceed $40 million, describes the terms of the bond issue, all current interest bonds, maximum term of 20 years, maximum borrowing rate of 5%. We're going to be below, far below that. We're going to be at 3.5% around there. It approves certain documents as to form, and it meets certain legal requirements, including providing the estimated cost of issuance. So with positive feedback tonight, we'll be back on May 8th, and as I said at the beginning, selling bonds on May 22nd, money in the bank at the first week of June. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. So again, this is for discussion this evening, action at the next meeting. If you have comments or questions that you would like addressed before you feel ready to act at the next meeting, please bring them forward. Ms. Baton-Caswell?
I have no questions.
Ms. Godfrey?
No, thank you very much for the detail.
Mr. Collins?
I just wanted to say thank you, because I think this is a useful, it was more than what I expected for this presentation in terms of detail and background, and I do think it's illustrative, and I definitely want a copy of the presentation, because I mean, again, for all the financial missteps that the district has had, this is not one. I think this has been a very well-managed program that has achieved exceptionally good financial results for the district. We've managed the resources we've had well. We've used our financial strength to obtain results that I think really move the needle for our students. And so I'm pleased that you were able to lay it out so clearly, so thank you.
Mr. Arun?
No comment. Thank you.
Mr. Islas?
No comment. Thank you.
And I just want to echo that. I think this really shows the respect that the board and the district have for the taxpayers and for making prudent use of their resources. So we appreciate that, and we look forward to taking this up at the next meeting. Ms. Baton-Caswell?
Yeah, can we post this presentation? Can you give it to us so that it's posted? I think this is actually a good one for our community to be able to see before the next meeting.
Yes, it's, actually, I believe it's posted right now.
Great.
Excellent.
So, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was great.
Item number F, this is once again for discussion. I think this is a brief item on the extension of the 525 San Antonio lease. Mr. Colton?
Yes, very brief. We're proposing, as we did last year, we proposed the lease be extended by a year, and we're doing the same thing this year, under the same terms.
Any comments or questions from board members on this item? Okay.
Yeah, what is Athena Academy? For those of us who don't know, I suppose.
Can you briefly describe Athena Academy and what they do?
The district some years ago acquired at what was thought to be a very expensive price, but in fact, it's a very cheap price, 2.67 acres on San Antonio Road. It was a former child care site. The Athena Academy is a school for students who have the gift of dyslexia. That's how they describe themselves.
Thank you very much. So it's a private business that's leasing our facility, leasing the district facilities. Nonprofit. Private nonprofit. Let's move on then to item number G, which is authorization to bid a replacement of some clocks, bells, and speakers at Pally. Ms. Hendricks?
Thank you. This is an accelerated request to solicit bids for the replacement of the clock and the PA system at Pally. And because we do have need to address this as quickly as possible, we had some learnings from our lockdown that I think were very useful in terms of our PA system. So after questions and discussions, I'd like to request that we waive the 2-meeting rule if possible and make plans to move forward with this, but we'll open it up for questions.
Are there questions or comments from board members on this item?
The only thing I would say is this is just a solicitation of bids. So from my perspective, I don't think there's much risk in waiving the 2-meeting rule.
Can I have a motion then to waive the 2-meeting rule?
So moved.
Second.
Student board member preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm going to continue with the roll call, even though I don't think that we have Mr. Branza, but I'll check. Mr. Branza? Ms. Godfrey?
Aye.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Ms. Baton-Caswell?
Aye.
And I vote yes, so the 2-meeting rule is waived. Is there a motion on the underlying recommendation?
I move that we allow staff to go out for bid for the system.
Second.
Student board members, preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Branza, absent. Ms. Godfrey?
Aye.
Mr. Collins?
Aye.
Ms. Baton-Caswell?
Aye.
And I vote yes as well, so that is authorized by a vote of 4-0.
Okay, thank you very much.
And so we'll move on to item number L, resolution regarding reduction of classified employee services.
So we discussed this at the last board meeting. We're bringing forward the resolution tonight. It's for a reduction of a 0.5 FTE account clerk. Again, we regret any need to reduce classified service. In this case, the services have been assessed over the course of the year, and it's been determined by the school site that could be provided differently. And I believe that we actually have found additional work for this employee, if that's correct. Maybe not. We're working on that right now because we do understand that we're being fiscally responsible and it involves personnel as well. So we want to be attentive to both. So take any questions or conversation, and then we would like to get approval on this resolution.
Comments or questions?
I'm sorry, I do need to, can you tell me more about this?
Last year, I believe, the motion was moved forward to do a reduction. This year, we were able to find the money to continue it, and we actually needed to reduce by 2.5, but through attrition, we have it down to 0.5. And it is for lack of funds and lack of work. So no one will be taking over the work that the person was doing.
And did I hear you say that there was potentially other work on site for the employee who's in this role now?
So what we're referring to, it's not in the same job, but we are looking to find helping the employee find employment, another job in the district. It would be a different classification, though.
Okay, and are we doing this now in case the budget doesn't support it next year, or we already know it won't?
It won't, and in fact, it didn't this year, but there was approval to continue the position so we could take some more time to get this right.
Okay, and that's how we ended up with a 0.5 versus a 2.5 decision to be made?
Yes.
Correct. It was assessment of needs and services that was conducted really through the course of this year.
Okay, thank you.
So we don't require a waiving of the 2-meeting rule in this case because we've previously discussed this. So is there a motion, or is there? I thought it said that we had discussed it.
We discussed it at the last board meeting.
Yeah, at the last board meeting. Yeah, that's a mistake. It should just say action. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I do have a comment.
Of course. Yeah.
The employee in question, they're a very valuable part of GUN, and I really do hope that we can find them employment on campus, because I know a lot of students and staff really enjoy the work that they provide, and I'm really sorry to see that they're being taken out of this position, but hopefully we can find them another position on campus. Yeah, I can't vote for or against this because of employee relations, but yeah, I really hope that we can find other employment.
I don't know if you're I don't know if you're barred from voting, but I wouldn't
I'm
intend
just going to
to.
assume that yeah.
Okay, well, I'll ask for your preferential vote anyways when it comes time to, if there's a motion.
Yeah, before we just go to that, I just want to say that absolutely we should be looking actively for placement of valuable employees. At the same time, if we have a reduction in need for a particular area of work, we should be reducing that. I mean, if the Student Resource Center has a reduction in hours, having the same number of hours of people there doesn't make sense. So I think this is a good exercise to find another place for that person to be using their good skills.
Okay, is there a motion to, for this resolution?
Go ahead.
I move that we approve Resolution 2017-18.12 to reduce classified employee services.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Student preferential vote?
Abstain.
Aye.
Mr. Brianza, absent. Ms. Godfrey?
Aye.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Brianza? I mean, sorry, Ms. Maiden-Caswell? I checked it
Aye.
already. And I vote aye as well, so the resolution is passed. Next is item M regarding home hospital instruction. Ms. Hendricks. This is an
Thank you. Trustee
information item.
Godfrey, would you like to open this up, or would you like me to?
Sure. I can share with my colleagues a little bit about
Okay,
this.
great.
As we all know, we have a hospital in our district. We have some fabulous teachers at that hospital doing some fabulous work. But one of the things that impresses me a lot about the teachers we have there is their care for all kids across the state. And so our teachers have participated in some statewide efforts to help standardize how kids who are hospitalized are educated. And it seems like one of those things that would have been standardized a long time ago, but it isn't. The way that kids are counted at CalPads and when they go to the hospital and when they're at home and when they go back and forth and if they can have, the same curriculum and all those kinds of things are not at all standard. And so there's a working group across the state who have worked on creating a set of standards and have asked the California State Assembly to codify that. So Kathy Ho, our own Kathy Ho, who's a teacher at the Lucy Packard Children's Hospital, and Judy Argumedo, who's the principal, have brought this forward for our support. It is, the fact sheet is in the package. The language around the bill is not, but I think for two reasons we should support this. One, because it supports ill kids around the state, and it is really the work of a very esteemed and committed set of folks who take care of those kids.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? So my understanding is the superintendent is going to provide a letter of support. Is that right? We're not.
I've drafted a letter. It's in the packet here. It'll be sent to the chair of the Assembly Education Committee. So I've provided it for review.
I would like to say that I have already sent in my letter of support and made sure that our Assembly member knows that I sent that in as well.
Thank you for doing that.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah. There's one student on Gun SEC. She's a sophomore named Hannah Suh, and I know she's working a lot to, working with our own assistant principal, Mike Hefner, and hospitals in Palo Alto to discuss a lot of these issues in regards to hospitalized students and how they can still learn or come to campus or get some sort of instruction like that. And at least looking at the information about the bill, I only found out about this when the packet was, when the agenda was released. But looking at all the information, this seems to actually help a lot in terms of codifying standards for us in our district to work better to actually handle a lot of these hospitalized students. So I mean, I was just taking a few quick notes to bring back to her tomorrow at SEC because this is something she really wanted to know about. And I think this really does support the work of a lot of students too who care about this issue. So for Hannah, I'm just voicing her own support for this.
That's terrific.
Thanks for connecting.
And thank you for your efforts, Ms. Godfrey, Ms. Hendricks, Ms. Bain-Caswell. Okay, let us move on then to item D from the consent calendar, which
which is a very minor.
Ms. Baton Caswell. Pulled.
Yeah, under, it's the minutes from February 27th, I'm sorry, from March 13th. And under board operations, it just, the way the sentence is worded, it is not venture. The word venture is not capitalized, so it's not clear that that is the name of the play. And so I'd just like to have it capitalized and probably italicized too, so it's just clear that that's the name, since it's not apparent.
That correction can make a big difference in understanding. It definitely can. Thank you. We'll go ahead and make that correction.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so I think we need
Thank
to,
you.
We need to vote on it?
yeah, we need a motion to adopt those minutes with that correction.
So I move that we do with that correction.
Second.
Student board members, preferential vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Brianza, absent. Ms. Godfrey,
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Yes.
Ms. Baton Caswell.
Aye.
And I vote yes. So those minutes are approved. Board operations. Ms. Baton Caswell, do you want to start?
Yeah, I do want to say that the Hoffman Awards tomorrow night, our own David Foster from Palo Alto High School is going to be co-emceeing with Supervisor Dave Cortese, who is not our own supervisor, but he was gracious enough to partner with our Palo Alto High School student. And the gun chamber, a group of gun chamber music and orchestra musicians will be playing. And we won last year. We got the biggest award last year. So it's sort of nice for us to be there to support some of the other awardees for this year and have our folks highlighted.
Thank you. Ms. Godfrey?
Oh, I had one more thing.
Oh, sorry, I apologize.
I would like to make or ask a question about the solar panels at Palo Alto High School. I'm wondering if that's going to come back to the board for some discussion, given the discussions that have been had about that. I think it might be a good idea to do that.
I do have a note to bring that up at agenda setting, so I can bring that next week, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I asked her the same thing today, so
Oh,
that's why it's
great
in
minds
her
think
notes,
alike.
to come back to
Thank
agenda
you.
setting. There's a lot going on. It's the beginning of the Million Days of May, and so I'm not going to list all the millions of things I'm going to go to, but I will enjoy them all awards, all concerts, all things.
Do you want to just give a summary of our Stanford Liaison Committee meeting? I realized we didn't do that.
Oh, with PAUSD Stanford Liaison Committee meeting last week, I believe. We talked a little bit about their GUP proposal. We also talked about the method that we're now using to try and get a first look at the property tax exemptions. You might recall that a couple of years ago, the increase in property tax base in the assessor's database didn't have enough detail for us to see that a lot of that was things that would be exempted later. And so we implemented a process by which Ms. Mack works with Stanford to figure out what they're going to request as exemptions so that she can avoid overestimating what our property tax is going to be. So we talked about that. We also talked about the University Terrace housing, which is the housing that's up where the Facebook campus used to be, up California Avenue. Folks are moving in there. They're sending us some kids, so we talk a little bit about the expectations around the number of kids and when the next phases would be of folks moving in. There's condos there as well, which have not been occupied yet. And I believe that's it. Was there more?
There was more detail, but you got the big picture.
That's it. Okay, that's it for us.
Okay. Mr. Collins?
I have uncharacteristically 4 things. One is an update on the City School Liaison Committee meeting
Thanks
sent
for these nice
around
notes, yeah.
and now circulated our summary of the meeting, and I wanted to, I will be, while I'm on this committee, sending around summaries like this for every meeting, because I think this, some of our subcommittee work does not benefit the board as much as I think it could, because it's so hard to inform our colleagues about what's going on. So I think that's something that additional investment will yield some return. So we made an effort to write up this one, and I think we'll do so in the future. And I think the city council members are also going to try to make an effort to incorporate communicate our messages to their members in a more consistent way, so that we have a communication channel with the council in the city that is,
So this would be on top of the meeting minutes they do?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think the meeting minutes get much circulation.
Okay.
They actually just do action minutes and transcription.
Okay.
So to the extent there is really, most of it is captured not in action and the transcription is quite lengthy, I think it benefits from summary.
Okay, great.
The most important thing to call out was the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, which is, I think, has very important implications for the district. This is primarily the Fry site, which is obviously being considered for redevelopment. A coordinated area plan apparently is a planning tool that the district uses, that the city uses to make sure there is planning involved with the redevelopment of the site. One of the elements of the plan is community, is things like neighborhood fabric and community facility needs, but it didn't explicitly call out schools. And one of the things that we asked them to do and asked them to keep in the forefront of their minds is that if they're going to build neighborhoods, that our tradition has been that we build schools, or at least provide schools, and that we be very mindful that primarily the district have a seat at the table to make sure that school facility requirements are incorporated into thinking as they plan. Looks like Ms. Caswell
And
wants.
I think it's a great reminder to them, and we're constantly being reminded by them that they're not allowed to consider schools in their planning, but you can sit at the table. So I think it's really important to ask to sit at the table.
So we're asking to sit at the table. There is a committee being formed of community members, and I would suggest that I'm certainly going to be mindful of who those committee members are and reach out to them to make sure that they are also cognizant of the school considerations for the neighborhood, and and as you can see in the memo, it says as needed, stakeholders like the district will be invited to participate. So we want to make sure we stay up in their grill and they know when they need us. There are future liaison committee meetings that include the Cubberley Master Plan. So if people have any comments or questions about that they wanted us to bring to City School, the next meeting in May will be the time that we discuss that next. Second, I also went to the Teacher Achievement Awards along with Ms. Godfrey and Ms. DeBrienza and Ms. Hendricks, who mentioned it. They were fabulous. Thank you very much, Ms. Baldwin and the PAEA, for bringing those together. As I said to her and numerous people who encountered me tipsy at this event, there are only two things that I thought could be better next year. One is that it would be 5 times bigger, and the other is that it would be 100% sponsored. Teachers were paying out of their own pocket for participation in this event, and which I think is a big, I mean, it was wonderful that so many actually chose to do so. But I've been to other events in other districts that were 100% sponsored by community businesses and community organizations, and the teachers were there to be celebrated. I would love to see us try to take that on next year. I would be happy to personally contribute. Third, I attended a meeting of the Latino Parent Network. I don't know, it may have been actually the first meeting of that group under the formal name, first one I was aware of. There were about 25 people at Ohlone Library, and Mr. Wheeler was there. I think there might have been other district staff there, but maybe not by the time I got there. I think that's a very important step forward in the our Latino family community, that they are organizing and trying to speak with a voice that can get the district's attention and make sure that their issues and concerns are addressed in a consistent way. So a very important group to keep your eye on. And finally, I spent this morning at Rocket Ship School in, I forget the name of the specific, what the specific name of it was, in East San Jose. Rocket Ship is a charter school with I think about a dozen schools in the Bay Area. It was fascinating in every regard. I think we have a ton that we could learn from them. I would love to talk to you, Ms. Hendricks, about how we can coordinate information exchange. They would be very open to doing so, both learning and sharing what they have learned. They serve, at that particular school, over 90% low-income students, primarily Hispanic and Vietnamese, and obtain very good results, and exceptional results, given the composition of students that they have. So, and they do things in many innovative ways, some of which I'm sure we can learn from and benefit from.
Thank you.
I don't have any report except that I want to thank Mr. Collins for creating the notes for the City School Liaison Committee. I think my name might be on it, but that is a courtesy only because Mr. Collins did 100% of the work on that. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned. And we will be returning to closed session.